Alright, so I play and watch a lot of competitive Smash, and I've been thinking about how the meta of the game has progressed. Then I started thinking about how the meta of other games I've played eventually progressed. And that's when I realized that there's an inherent problem with games that use any form of leveling, whether it's leveling up your skill or your gear. Every game is going to suffer from the same issues caused by power creep and skill gaps. I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. If for some reason you've clicked on this video and have no idea what power creep or skill gaps are, here's a quick rundown. Power creep is when new things get added to a game that outclass previous options. So think like if a game adds a new character or weapon, and they're initially broken because they simply outperform what you had before. Skill gap is basically the difference between two players, typically one of them being on the higher end of the spectrum, and the other being on the lower end. So let's start with power creep because that one usually doesn't involve other players, and can be a little more quantifiable. One of the easiest and most recognizable examples is that of diamonds in Minecraft. They used to be the rarest and most valuable material. Every other tool paled in comparison to the diamond versions. They mined faster, had better durability, and would generally roll very good enchantments. There's a reason why every YouTuber from 2010 freaked out when they saw that iconic blue ore. Diamonds are really only used in crafting tools and equipment. Yeah, you've got a few other recipes, but generally speaking, it was for gear. Diamond ruled all the way up until June of 2020 when the Nether update dropped. The changes to the Nether were much needed and really fleshed out an otherwise really empty part of the game. However, the biggest change came on the progression side of things. It added Netherite, a new ore, and a new tier above Diamond. Diamond was no longer king. Netherite outclassed it in every way. Now, you do need diamond gear to upgrade into Netherite. You can't just craft Netherite. But that put diamond in a really awkward position. Now it just kind of exists once you get Netherite. There's no real reason to go hunting for it. And that is why developers need to be hyper aware of balancing power creep. Iron, the tier below diamond, is still incredibly useful, even more so than diamond. The problem isn't that diamond is no longer the best material. That was bound to happen at some point. Fortunately, Minecraft is mostly a PvE game. Yeah, I know there's a PvP community, but most people are going to be fighting mobs 95% of the time. Imagine if this was a gear-driven PvP game, like Destiny. Oh wait, that's exactly what happened in Destiny. Of course, you've got some off-meta builds and gear, but for the most part, you're going to be dying to the same weapon a lot in Crucible matches. And that even applies to raids. Anyone remember back in the D1 days when people would literally kick you from raid groups if you didn't have Yallarhorn? Because that was definitely a thing. Devs need to be able to balance things so that past gear is still relevant. Okay, let's kind of put this on a graph or chart or whatever. Let's say that all of the gear you can obtain falls along a bell curve. Some gear is garbage, some is amazing, but most of the gear you get falls somewhere in the middle. Well, as the game progresses, developers want to entice new players to join, or encourage old players to hop back in. So, what do? They create really strong gear, and that starts to skew the bell curve. Suddenly, all this stuff in the middle becomes kinda useless, and you start getting more at the top. The problem is that the new stuff at the top begins to sort itself out into a new bell curve. The things that were once meta, or even overpowered, become normal. That's a problem because most in-game activities are balanced around the previous bell curve. This snowballs so ridiculously quickly until everything becomes so highly optimized that you either lost the original intent and vision of the game, or there's no more challenge. This is basically the gear version of skill gaps in competitive games. As the meta progresses, we see how people begin to optimize their options. This is true for literally every game. Fighting games, MOBAs, FPSs, all of them. I mean, when Smash Ultimate first came out, professional players were getting bodied by the CPUs. And the same thing happened once Street Fighter VI released. People were unfamiliar with the mechanics of the game. However, once we practiced and got the hang of things, that never happened. So the skill curve for the game looked the same as the first power creep curve. You've got a few bad players, a few top level players, but most of us fell somewhere in between. Unfortunately, things really only got worse. Most people who are bad at the game quit. That's just the natural flow of things. So let's say that the bottom 20% of people drop the game after a year, and then the next 20% drop after another year. All of a sudden, you have a ton of people who were very middle of the road average just getting curb stomped every game. It's not their fault either. They didn't get worse. The competition just got more fierce and more refined. It's not fun to get your cheeks clapped every game. By the time a game reaches year 2 or 3, a top 20% player might now be in the bottom 20% just because of how many players quit. Fighting games are already notoriously difficult to jump into. I mean, just take a look at any Tekken move list. You have to memorize literally upwards of 100 moves just to master your character. And then you have to know their matchups and frame data and general mechanics of each game. It's a difficult recipe for longevity. I think Street Fighter 6's single player and modern controls, and Smash's casual focus are a good middle ground. They give you low stakes options to enjoy the game without forcing you into the punishing battleground of ranked online. It's tough to balance both power creep and skill gaps. They're really similar concepts and tend to have similar endgames. One forces out underperforming gear, and one forces out underperforming players. Developers need to be hyper aware of how these games will affect the long-term health of their games if they're going for that sort of live service model. And it sucks too, because we all want to feel powerful and win online matches, but we can't have it all. There has to be some sort of middle ground to keep things balanced. I think it's great when companies experiment with new game modes. It's a great way to bring in new and old players without throwing everything out of whack. I'm no game developer. I think that'd be an awesome and a horrible job at the same time. You can do everything in your power to make sure your game is balanced and fun, but people will always find a way to break it. There's nothing wrong with having a steep skill curve or even chasing after that crazy endgame set, but it's a dangerous and slippery slope. However, if you manage to ride that razor's edge, you'll have an incredible experience on your hands. Thanks for watching.